So my name is Maksym Polyakov. I'm presenting preliminary result of study of value of restoring and protecting native vegetation in New Zealand. My co-authors are Patrick Walsh, who was in Lancashire Research, and now he's in US EPA. Said Iftikhar from University of Griffith University, he used to be in UWA, and Susie Greenhalgh from Lancashire Research. So the rationale for this study is that New Zealand terrestrial biodiversity it's very biodiverse, but it's very also under threat. Out of 11,000 terrestrial species, 7% are threatened and almost quarter at risk. Key threats to biodiversity in New Zealand are terrestrial biodiversity in New Zealand are, as everywhere else, habitat loss, invasive species, in climate change, and we have to address those issues. Cannot do it at the same time, and I'll try to focus on habitat loss. So about 63% of New Zealand land area has been cleared. Specifically, about 90% of wetlands were cleared, damaged, or dried. 80 to 90% of lowland forests were cleared. For basically, it's fertile land, and they were cleared for agriculture. And out of forests which are on slopes, more than 70% were cleared for basically grazing. On the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, there is a map of threatened environment classification developed by Lancashire Research, and it shows different stages of threat. And red is if only less than 10% of the indigenous land cover lost or left. Between 10 and 20 is orange. Between 20 and 30 is slightly kind of yellowish orange. And other three classes, yellow would be if more than 30% left, but less than 10% protected. Green yellow would be more than 10% left and 10 to 20% protected, and green would be if more than 30% left and more than 20% protected. So basically, there is a lot of work can be done to, or need to be done to improve biodiversity to kind of combat this habitat loss. So it could be done by protecting and restoring native vegetation. So first of all, it could be protected, and about 1/3 of New Zealand is protected by public conservation land, such as national park, reserve, and so on. It could be also protected by private conservation on private land under covenants, for example, QE2 Queen Elizabeth II Trust. About 1% of land cover is a little bit less than 1% of land cover is covered by this kind of protection. And something which is, could potentially reverse habitat loss to improve biodiversity would be reestablishment of natural ecosystems on degraded areas. There are a number of initiatives or approaches to do this. There are local initiatives like councils, EVs, community groups. There are regional programs, and there are also national programs. And one of them is 1 Billion Trees program, which is from 2018 to 2028, kind of attempt to plant 1 billion trees in New Zealand through grants to private landowners. Map on the right shows locations of plantings across New Zealand, where green would be native plantings and red would be non-native trees plantings. So to basically plan and target and evaluate all those programs, it's necessary to know what is a benefit, because we kind of have a good idea about cost of ecological restoration, of restoring native vegetation. And And also since we have also conservation on private land through covenants, it would be also interesting to know what is the benefit of those covenants. And there are some of the aspect of benefits could be easily quantifiable through, for example, water quality. But then there are some other benefits of this restored native vegetation, which like not easy to quantify because they have non-market value. So it would be useful to know what is a non-market value of those restored native vegetation, forest or wetlands, or in order to be able to plan, target, and assess past programs. So the goal of this study is to estimate value of native vegetation. And we focus, there were a number of studies which looked at value of biodiversity in New Zealand, and they mostly looked at, specifically Richard did some. They looked mostly at qualitative aspects. And what we want to do here is to look at more quantitative aspects to the attributes or metrics which would be easily connectable to their programs, such as billion trees, which would be relatable to people. And also another kind of target or goal of this study is to be able to get regional values. How do people in regions, in different regions, value restoring or value native vegetation, and our metric would be restoration. So we try to use reasonable, realistic areas of protected restoration and of potential restoration and protection of native vegetation. We use choice experiment. We target representative sample of people, of residents of New Zealand across New Zealand region, but not necessarily representative by population of New Zealand, representative, so we could have all regions represented. And our time frame of this survey, of this, what we value is, it will be achieved in 20 years. So attributes of our survey are restoring wetlands, restoring lowland forest, restoring hill country forest, because they are different ecosystems, they have different threats, they have different characteristics, they have different extent before clearance. And fourth attribute would be protecting native vegetation through the covenanting, such as Queen Elizabeth II Trust. So attributes levels would be like restoring wetlands, lowland forest, hill country forest, or protecting native vegetation. They designed they are based on the preclearance area of these vegetation types and the remaining area of vegetation types in regions. So people in region get information about their kind of region characteristics of this vegetation time. And as far as protecting native vegetation, the attributes levels are kind of derived based on the remnant native vegetation, which is still remains on the private lands in the region, and like proportion fraction of the this remnant native vegetation in region which is being covenanted. So they would be basically looking at the at the levels and would be able to compare to kind of past status of these ecosystems and what being left. So this is on the right hand side, you see example of the choice card. We have 4 attributes, as I mentioned: lowland, native forest, hill country, native forest, wetland, and remnant native vegetation on private land. So we have 3 options. One is no change, and 2 and 3 different levels of increase of restoring is a 3 vegetation type or protecting existing native vegetation. We did 24 choice set and split them into 8 blocks, and we used the efficient design. And
Just
levels are,
Maksym.
sorry?
2 more minutes.
Okay, so we administered this survey through survey company. In June 2021, we got 1231 surveys. We removed protests, those who didn't consider budget, and those always selected highest cost. We got 839 results. These are preliminary results, so since June we didn't have much time to do analysis. So first 3 lines on the top would be our attributes of interest. Oh, so we did mixed logit model in the willingness to pay space, and we did these 4 attributes are squared, and the random parameters would be 4 attributes and status quo. So these are on the X size, we have willingness to pay in $1,000, and the areas would be in thousands hectares, values of the areas. So you can see that wetlands has, for linear term, it has high value, but restoring of lowland forest has high values, and restoring of hill country forests or covenants don't have non-significant results. Status quo is negative, which means people willing to pay more, like they don't know what for. And we interacted status quo with a number of attributes for which I guess I don't have time to talk. The square terms are also significant for these 2 attributes, which for lowland forest and for hill country forest, and for 2 vegetation types. For hill country forest and for conservation covenant, they are not significant, and standard deviation are also significant. So this is an example of marginal willingness to pay for 2 attributes which are significant for wetland is gray, and for lowland forest is yellow. We have different levels because of like potential. The restoration of wetland is like there are much less potentially wetland than potentially lowland forest, for example. So that's why this is shown in different ranges. In x-axis we have hectares restored, and maximum for wetland was 400 hectares, and for lowland forest was 2,000 hectares. So it shows that maximum willingness to pay for restoring wetlands will be about $50 or $45 for 250 hectares, and about $70 for 1,700 hectares. Okay, so since we did, we want to get value by regions, and we did random parameter logit model. We have individual estimates for the each respondent, and we could derive regional values based on that using regression, similar to what Richard Yao did and other people did. So we estimated values for these 2 parameters in region. By region, in lowland forest, this is a range from about $60 per 1,000 hectares restoration of wetland in west coast to about 90 in Gisborne, and for lowland forest, and for wetlands it would be from $250 to $400 per 1,000 hectares in same regions in west coast and Gisborne. So these results are not final. You'll still look at it, and specifically there are some kind of red signs. For example, why in Gisborne in Northland we have very high willingness to pay. We'll look at that. Despite those kind of poorer region, it's not a surprise about west coast. So there are preliminary conclusions that we conducted a national survey to estimate willingness to pay for restoring and conserving native vegetation. And we have robust positive value for lowland forest and wetlands, and we have willingness to pay for hill country forest, and for conservation of covenants are not significant, and then there is substantial variation of willingness to pay by region, and we need to kind of keep working on it to get sensible results.
Thank you.
I would be happy to get questions and I guess maybe suggestions.